Hi, my name is Angela Peacock. I am a subject of the film Medicating Normal, and I also volunteer doing outreach, and I host conversations like this one. This is our 22nd interview, and our guest today is David Healy. David is a professor of psychiatry at the Department of Family Medicine at McMaster University in Hamilton, Canada, but he's about to tell you about himself. So if you want to know more, just Google it. He is also the author. Oh, I'll just let you go ahead. David, please. Thank you so much for joining us today. We know David because we're just in love with all of his talks, his books, his research. When I listen to him, I just get fired up. He really just has that spirit of doing what's right and bringing attention to all these issues, even when they're uncomfortable. So I just appreciate your work. And before we get started, I just want to say thank you from our community that you've just been a fierce advocate for so many of us.
I think I've only been an advocate because of people like you. It's meant that I've bumped into a bunch of people who really show me how things work, and so I've gained in the process. But let me take you guys back to where it all began. And I did medicine, and this is probably important to know. I did medicine probably for much the same reasons as most of the other people that I know did medicine, which was, well, you want a bit of status. You want a job that gives you status and money and things like that. So it was not for caring reasons. Nobody that I've met actually goes into medicine because they care about people. They just think, hey, I'm going to be paid well and this is going to be a comfortable job. Okay. I was also vaguely thinking about going into the mental health field when I went into medicine first. And the reasons for that were a little bit different, but again, probably not a million miles away from a load of other people, which was, in my case, I was trying to answer the most important question in the world. What makes girls think the way they do, basically? Really? Okay. So now, by accident, in the middle of all this, before I sort of qualified, I ended up doing some research, and I went to a lab, which is over in the west of Ireland. And at that time, they were fiddling around with serotonin, okay? And this was before we got the SSRIs. This was before Prozac and things like that. So there was a chance to work on it and do some research on people who were depressed and see what happened at the serotonin when you tried to treat them and things like this. And because of that, I ended up with a few of the companies making the drugs that we now know as the SSRIs. They began to visit the lab and they began to talk to people like me and the other people there in the lab. And you learned a lot about what was actually going on, which was they figured, well, SSRIs are pretty poor drugs compared with the older antidepressants, that if we run clinical trials, the older drugs beat the SSRIs easily. And, it's not obvious to us that there's going to be a market for these drugs. But then you began to realize that even though they thought that drugs weren't all that great and came with problems, that they still thought they'd be able to sell them. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing for me, and the interesting thing I think for you maybe as well, is that because I was one of the few people around the place who knew a little bit about serotonin, whereas the average doctor didn't, they figured that I was the kind of person that the pharmaceutical companies could put me out there to talk to a bunch of doctors, to educate them and things like that about the SSRIs. And educate didn't mean repeating the idea that these drugs are weak and useless and you shouldn't use them. It meant letting people know about serotonin, okay? So that meant that I got to see things from the inside a bit, okay? You could see that the pharmaceutical industry had begun to say things about lowered serotonin levels, and it's the happy chemical and things like this. And if you knew a bit about serotonin, or at least if you knew a bit about the things that we thought we knew then, this was all gobbledygook. This was biobabble, as I began to call it. It wasn't anything to do with the science. It was just loose talk. And the oddity was the doctors that I'd lectured to about all this didn't really ask any awkward questions. They just lapped it up and they repeated the same stuff to the patients that they gave the pills to. And you began thinking, well, this is all very loose kind of stuff, okay? But the other thing was, it was a good way to see how the pharmaceutical industry worked and things like that. And it introduced me to a few things that played a part later on, which was that getting involved in meetings for the pharmaceutical industry, that I'd be asked to the meeting and I'd say, yes, I'm happy to go along to this meeting and things like that. And they'd email me then later and say, well, look, what we want is at the end of the meeting, we want a few articles to come out of this meeting, which will get published in a reasonably good journal or whatever. And I'd say, fine, I'm happy to write an article. And then the next email would turn up, which had my article in it. They'd written the article. Now, the extraordinary thing about it was this, that you could take a bunch of Healy articles, and lay them out on the table and get a bunch of people that knew me well and ask them to pick out the real Healy articles from the ones that were not written by Healy. And there's no way they'd be able to do it. I mean, the articles that were written for me referenced my work and said the kinds of things that I say and things like that. It was kind of
creepy.
It's a bit like meeting your double kind of thing.
Wow.
Okay. So every so often, not every so often, when this actually happened first, I said to the company, look, well, when I agreed to get involved in this, I was happy to write my own article. So I'm going to go ahead and write my own article. And their response was, well, this is a bit unusual, but fine, okay. And when I did, they said, oh, yes, this is actually quite good. But there were some important commercial points we had in the previous article. And what we're going to do is we're going to put someone else's name on the other article. Now, what they did with the other article is they didn't change a thing. I mean, I've still got all this. They didn't change a thing, but they put the name of the professor of psychiatry from Vienna on the other article that I'm thinking about now. And, when you think Freud came from Vienna, it kind of gives you a feeling that, well, Vienna's come down in the world a lot. Yeah. Okay. The other thing was later on, I had a chance to do the same kind of thing, to say, well, okay, I'm going to take your article, but I'm just going to change a few little bits in it. Okay. And you change a few little bits on the lines of saying something about, well, we know that antidepressants can cause people to become suicidal. Checking, I've been told you can do whatever you want. Here's the article that we've written. You can change it whatever way you want. And then you'd find, of course, if you put a thing like this into it, well, no, you couldn't change it whatever way you want. So anyway, way back when the SSRIs came out first, one of the things, given that I knew a bit about how these drugs worked and had been teaching people about them and things like that, I thought, well, hey, I have to give these drugs to a few people as well, just to see what happens in real life, okay? And reasonably early on, after they came out in the UK, which is actually where I was then, I had two people who became suicidal, okay? They'd gone on Prozac, they become suicidal, you halted the drug, the thing cleared up, you put them on Prozac again and things, they actually became suicidal again, okay? So, I wrote it up and wrote up the cases and said, look, it looks like these drugs maybe can cause some people to become suicidal, okay? Now, around the time that this happened to me, the article, there was a reasonably famous article by three people from Harvard called Teicher, Glad, and Co. And it came out and said, look, we've had 6 cases of people going on Prozac and they've become suicidal, okay? And I know I was asked by one of the people that I know quite well in the field, what did I make of this article that had just come out saying Prozac can cause people to become suicidal? I said, yep, I think that's true. I've seen just the same kind of thing, okay? So I wrote the article up, and what actually happened then was interesting, which was, rather than the pharmaceutical industry sort of saying, oh, Healy's an awkward customer, we need to try and sort him out, all of a sudden I get an invitation to become a consultant for Eli Lilly.
Wow.
And being a consultant meant, I got first-class train down to London to meet a group of colleagues in the most expensive hotel in London, taken out for a meal with them all, and, meeting people from the pharmaceutical company who were extraordinarily friendly and, became your best friends, and they knew what you did and they knew your children's names, and, they were really nice people. And, after you've been out for the meal and all, you sort of go, back to the hotel, and the next day you'd be with them in the company headquarters, seated around a table, 10 or 12 people. And in theory, the idea was they were just trying to find out what we all thought about the field and things like that, and they were offering a few gifts, like we can give you some media training, so if issues come up and the media get in touch with you, you'll know how to handle them and things like that, okay? But they didn't really want to find out much from us. They wanted us to become friends and to be the kind of people who'd talk in meetings and handle issues for them. Or if the media were concerned about things, that they'd have people who didn't look like they were company people to go to. Wow. And, because it's hard work to get media training and to be treated like an expert and things like that, they had to pay us, and they had to pay us well to do all this work as well. So didn't actually stop there. Later on, I was at a different meeting, and this kind of thing gets a little unusual thinking back about it. I was at a different meeting. I think I'd probably talked about Prozac causing people to become suicidal. And again, the industry didn't seem to be too upset at me doing this then. But later on that evening, I'd come back up to my room in the hotel, and one of the people working for one of the companies appears at my hotel room door, okay? And she's an attractive woman, and she's fit, and she's tanned, and she's not wearing a huge amount of clothes, and she's holding a tray which has got a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses on it. Wow. And, is about to ask herself in. And so I kind of, say no. And but anyway, this is the kind of thing that can happen. It's all about getting you on side. And I think at this stage, industry didn't quite know what to make of me, whether I was a friend or a foe or whatever,
But it sounds a lot, David, like they're grooming you, almost like a child molester would groom a kid. Do you know what I mean? Like, let me butter you up. I mean, all those things are influencing you, whether you believe it or not. Even a hasty sandwich can influence you, No,
of course it can. But it's more a case of making friends. And it's hard for you to kind of do nasty things to your friends, okay? Now, things changed slightly when I ultimately ended up a few years later opting to become an expert witness in a case involving Prozac and a man who'd gone to kill himself and kill his wife, okay? Wow. Now, one of the extraordinary things about that was the legal firm who were taking the case for the man's kids had found it impossible to get an expert witness in the United States. So they'd come across the article that I'd written about Prozac causing people to become suicidal, and they reached out to me, and I said, hey, I'm happy to have a look at this. And when I did have a look at it, it seemed awfully clear to me that there was no other way to explain what had happened other than this man had got on Prozac and roughly 10 days later killed himself and killed his wife. And the cop that turned up at the scene said he'd never seen so much blood in his life, okay? Wow. So anyway, this case ended up going to court, okay? And it was after that things changed vis-a-vis the industry and me, okay? And a short while later after that, and they changed both for the bad and for the good. I ended up getting a job at the University of Toronto, okay? And I was just about to move over, and I was in the job of trying to interview people who are going to be working on my team and looking where to buy a house and looking where the kids are going to go to school and things like that. And the university put on a meeting, which was to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the mental health service in the area, and the 75th anniversary of the University Department of Psychiatry. And this was the year 2000, okay? And they asked me along to give a talk, and there was a